Okay, this is Brother Wolf, and we're here with HS 345 again. We're doing a case study, and this is case number 3. This is the group 4. I've just recently posted group 3's recording. We did that just a few minutes ago, and then I'll post this recording. And so I'm just going to let group 4 start when they're ready. Feel free to start, guys.
Perfect. Thank you, Brother Wolf. My name is David Itell. I'll be representing group number 4 here. Our team was Sam Rose, myself, David Itell, Jordan Larson, and Andrew Johnson. This week's case, as many of you know, is case number 3, the Rio Grande Medical Center, involving issues with financial control between the dialysis center and the outpatient clinic, and who really deserves to pay the costs when major changes are made. Andrew, could you please go to the next slide? So the first question regarding this case scenario was whether or not it was fair for the dialysis center to suffer in profitability from the move, meaning the move into a new building, if they had nothing to do with it. So if you've read the case study, you know that the dialysis center in this case was forced to move to a brand new building with a new cost and a lot more expenses, to give room to the outpatient clinic that would gain the 20,000 square feet room for increased patient usage and other things. This, in the case study, it was stated that this move was basically forced upon the dialysis center, and now it was their job to figure out profitability with this added cost. We as a group really do not believe that it is fair for the dialysis center to suffer this cost when they really didn't have a choice in the matter. As we stated, it was better for the outpatient clinic to have the original space, the dialysis clinic, which we agree that is the right choice, and I think any administrator would. The outpatient probably takes up more patient use and has a lot more profitability than the dialysis center. But just because they are forced to pay for a new building for the dialysis center doesn't mean that the cost should really come down to them. It should be allocated to kind of all parties that benefit from that move. Could you please go to the next slide, Andrew? In question 2, you are asked, should the dialysis center be charged for the actual cost of the new facility? The actual cost, I believe, stated in the scenario was $400,000. Let's see, I have it here, yeah. Which, of course, would be depreciated over 20 years. But regardless, the entire charge should not be put on the dialysis center's total budget. This would affect their annual profitability, and this is an added cost above their normal overhead. This would be considered a indirect cost, which included in their general overhead rather than a direct expense for their actual operations. This would last 20 years and would really cut their profitability down to negative numbers for the next 20 years if they were asked to have the actual cost of the new facility, which, going along with the first question, we really don't believe that that is fair nor necessary for the entire situation of the hospital. Andrew, next slide, please. So in question 3, it kind of goes back to question 1 and 2. Yeah, the allocation costs were $400,000 for the new location. If the true cost allocation is applied, what would the allocation be for the 21st year of this, the year after this mortgage is paid off? So the yearly cost of the mortgage would be about $394,000 for each year. On the final year, the cost, which if you've learned from your previous chapters, essentially when depreciation ends, that expense is taken off of your report. At which point that building is, you could say, 100% profit. It means it's no longer on your profit and loss statement. It doesn't decrease or increase your expenses, which then would decrease your profitability. At that year, on the 21st year, they would no longer be charged for it, and the building would be fully built, and essentially they'd be more profitable. Those expenses would be removed from the report, and you'd probably see a skyrocketing in profitability from the dialysis center, which is you'd see in any situation when depreciation is finally completed with the expense, and those assets are finally paid off. Andrew, could you please go to the next slide? So, in looking at this demo, or sorry, this case scenario, We look at three distinct factors during this report: the revenues, the direct expenses, and the indirect expenses. These are taken from the profit and loss statement. In this question, it's talked about how one of the direct expenses was the pharmacy costs for the dialysis center. It also talked in the case scenario about dialysis. Primary thing is used for financial dialysis need medication to work. So without it, they really can't run. So basically, in the question and in the scenario, you see that the dialysis center is being charged $800,000 a year for the dialysis medication. This goes under their expenses. But if the actual cost of the dialysis medication is only $400,000, then really their profit loss report is inaccurate. They should only be charged the direct expense of $400,000, in which case that would increase their profitability significantly. And let's see. We don't have it stated here in our answer, but I can just do it real quick on my backup spreadsheet. This allocation, without any other change in the profit and loss sheet and the allocation ratios, would increase the it would make the profit margin for the net profit for the dialysis center under the new allocation $330,000. That's a lot larger than their originally stated. $30,000 or three. No, that's not right. Sorry, my spreadsheet seemed to is broken. So regardless, this question is really talking about whether or not all of your expenses are being allocated properly or even being charged properly. And this can happen really easily between departments in hospitals and how they charge each other. This interdepartmental expense. So the question states whether or not they should be charged the full $800,000, and we believe they shouldn't. And if they weren't, of course, they'd receive a much higher net profit. Andrew, could you go to the next slide? So next slide, or the last question really talks about, and I'll leave the rest of this with Sam, is to evenly distribute or fairly distribute the costs among the outpatient clinic and the dialysis center. You have to do some expense allocation between the two departments, and you should find a way that's fair. Originally, we looked at the equations and we thought about just changing the facility cost per square foot between the two, but then we realized that we also need to look at the indirect and direct expenses, just like we did in question number 4. With that, I will pass it off to Sam.
All right, so you can go ahead and go to the next slide to show how we've done, at least one way we've done it. And so in our first proposal for how to reallocate the indirect costs for the facility, which, just to highlight, are going to be the facilities costs and the general overhead. The first thing that we did was we did use square feet as the cost driver. And so you can see in the little orange box there how we allocated that. So you have the total facilities cost of $1.9 million, and the total square footage is now 120,000 square feet. The allocation rate there then becomes $1,583. When you multiply that back through their each size of the facility, you can see that for the dialysis center, the facility cost now becomes $316,666.67 per year, as opposed to the $400,000 that it was being charged before. This does raise the profit from a negative $70,000 loss to making $13,333.33. And you can see there at the very bottom that that does equal out to have $1,583 charged per square foot. And then of note as well, just to kind of double check our work, when you go back through the facilities costs and you add both of them together for the dialysis center and the outpatient clinic, that does equal back out to that $1.9 million that was originally slated when they did the initial allocation. So that is one proposal and one way to reallocate the costs to make it a little bit more fair, as opposed to the dialysis center paying for the whole thing. Now they're taking about a $83,000 discount. Let's go to the next slide. And the next way that we worked to reallocate the indirect costs to the dialysis center, or facilities costs rather, is going to be using the revenue as the cost driver. And so you can see on the right hand side, again in the little green box this time, We have the total facilities cost, and then you have the total revenue, which equals out to 0.084 cents per dollar. When you multiply that back out across the revenue of each of the two facilities, that comes out to, in the facilities cost section on the left, $225,991.18 for the dialysis center, and then the $1,674.08 with 81 cents for the outpatient clinic. This scenario gives the dialysis center a net profit of $104,008.81 per year, which is drastically different than the loss they were going to take initially, and then even better than when you do it based on square feet. The fairness of using the revenue as opposed to the square feet could be up for argument and discussion, but that is another way to allocate those costs to make it a little bit more fair. In this one, you can see that they're paying about $175,000 a year less for the facility or the new building than they would have before. And so we can go to the next slide. All right, and so this one is just going to kind of bring everything together as far as question 4 and question 5. And so in this example, on the left-hand side, we have the square foot driver analysis, and on the right-hand side, we have the revenue cost driver analysis. In both of those, you can see that the direct expenses have been lowered by $400,000. So basically, the pharmacy would be charging the basically charging their own company cost for the medications, and thus that revenue stays completely with the dialysis center. And you can see in both of those the jump to profit of the $400,000 each. So, and that is it for question 5.
That's great. That last slide was really, I think, effective to kind of show how it can be done in different ways, and then what those effects are. It's nice to see those side to side. That might be a good thing to ask your classmates about, or not necessarily debate, but discuss, which one's more fair. And if somebody says, oh, the square foot driver, then you could bring up why the other might be better, and vice versa. Not necessarily that one is right and one is wrong, but just so that people can demonstrate that they understand the differences. So that's a really good one. Excellent. So I won't ask a whole lot more questions here. We'll try to engage a little bit more on the discussion board. So if somebody would post those slides, that would be great. Do you guys have any last-minute thoughts or questions?
I just have a thought or a question that maybe you'd be able to answer, and it was just in regards to when talking about allocation. And the two drivers we talked about in this scenario, we looked at revenue and we looked at square feet. One thing I mentioned in my own report of this is that a new building probably wouldn't require as much cleaning costs or service costs as an older building. Would you be able to tell me, or tell me kind of your personal opinion of whether or not that is ever taken into account when allocating these costs, and how that might happen?
So you went in and out a little bit for me there, but if I understood correctly, you're asking, because it's a newer building, and you might assume that because it's newer, you'd have less maintenance cost. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And then how that would be played into the allocation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I've seen that expressed very much. Now, admittedly, I was not in the accounting department. I'm sure that kind of question does come up in the accounting department. I was in departments where most of the time these things were given to us, and those decisions on which way it was going to be allocated was already decided. And so those types of things were, when it came down to the department level, we were given typically kind of two different spreadsheets, or two parts of one spreadsheet, where the things that we could control and the things we couldn't control, those kinds of decisions were made at the accounting level. And I never really got, from my personal experience, didn't have much experience in those decisions. But that's a great question. Wonder if that could be something that we could ask others, or even research a little bit to see if that's ever been dealt with.
And Brother Wolf, do you mind if I jump in for a second on that?
Yeah, please.
So in this specific scenario, the facilities costs, the case study specifically stated that the facilities costs are only concerning the interest and payments on the long-term debt or the mortgage, as well as the depreciation of the building itself. And so if we were allocating costs for the housekeeping department or the environmental services department, I think is what they're called in some facilities, then that would definitely be taken into account, I'm sure, if we were doing it based on hours of housekeeping, because they'd be using less hours. But in this instance, the facilities cost doesn't actually include any of the cleaning and maintenance costs. And so it'd be kind of hard to do that in this example. If we were allocating costs of the actual environmental services department or the housekeeping department, if you will, then that definitely would come into play. But in this scenario, unfortunately, it doesn't work just based on what the facilities costs are.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And what I was trying to say is that those kinds of decisions are typically made, kind of in the accounting or finance departments. And, I was more on the department end, and those things were just that we were told this is what's going to be allocated. Oftentimes I would ask, well, how did you come up with that number? And because we'd sometimes just get these things that hit our budget, and they're like, oh, we're going to do it this way now. And I quite honestly didn't dare challenge those types of decisions. But you're right; those things would definitely be taken into account, but probably at a little bit of a different level. So good comment. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Any other last-minute thoughts or comments?
I think we're good.
Very well done. So thank you so much. If you'll post the slides and then just watch the discussion board, and then I'll get this link posted probably later tonight.
Anyone want to volunteer to post the slides?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Perfect.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Good night.
You have a wonderful night.